If you've been following this channel, you know this is not the first time I've said a player is not human. But you also know that I saved that title for players that are on a different level. I'm talking about guys like Jordan, Kobe, Pistol Pete Maravich, Anthony Davis. Guys that were not only NBA stars, but they were also different. And so today we're going to be talking about one of the most different players the NBA has ever seen. We're talking about former Harlem Globetrotter Wilt Chamberlain. That's what he's best known for, right? And in this video, we have too much to talk about, so we're not gonna mention his stats. Instead, I'm just going to share story after story about Wilt Chamberlain that will blow your mind, I promise. And one quick note before that, I just want to say, guys, we are 30,000 subscribers away from 1 million. So if you want to join this journey before we get to 1 million, if you want to get to 1 million together, then make sure you subscribe and let's get this done. For now, though, let's look at 5 stories why Wilt Chamberlain was not human. Number 5. A 50-inch vertical leap. Let's start out by saying that as a pure athlete, Wilt could easily fit into the NBA today. I know this because he wasn't only a great athlete in the 60s, he wasn't only a special athlete. No, Wilt was an absolute freak, an alien. He was, dare I say, not human? A little cheesy, I get it, but to show you what I mean, the first thing we're going to talk about was the man's vertical leap. Now, we're not sure exactly how high Wilt could jump. That wasn't something they measured in the 1960s. Regardless, some from his era have estimated that Wilt's vertical was around 48 inches, while others have said that it was as high as 54 inches. So even if his vertical was on the low end of the spectrum there, we're still talking about a 7'1" center who apparently had a vertical leap that was comparable to Michael Jordan's. That seems crazy, I get it. But let's just take a look at this video. We can see here that during a game, Wilt's arm almost reaches the top of the backboard. So if you think a 54-inch vertical leap is a little unbelievable, fine. Let's just agree though that the man could jump. That was a major reason for why he was so unstoppable at the time. Not only was he among the tallest people in the world, he also had the highest vertical in basketball. This allowed Wilt to leap over his defenders for easy layups. He was able to sky for rebounds that other men of his era could only dream of grabbing. Wilt's jumping ability was legit. The game tape certainly proves this. And the thing is, the stories we have from Wilt's time only further this fact. For instance, while at Kansas, Wilt's coach Phog Allen was pushing for basketball to be played on 12-foot rims, which was strange, but what was even stranger was that Wilt was able to routinely dunk on those 12-foot rims. And actually, that should be no surprise, because according to Sonny Hill, Wilt could grab a quarter off the top of the backboard. Keep in mind, the top of the backboard is 13 feet tall. And perhaps the most incredible thing Wilt's jumping ability achieved was an actual rule change, because there was a time when Wilt would take 3 steps back from the foul line, throw the ball at the backboard, run, jump from the free throw line, rebound the miss, and dunk to make sure that every foul shot he took went in. Yes, this was legal at the time, and of course, it isn't now, because basketball had to change its rules for Wilt Chamberlain. Number 4. Freakish strength. When players from his era talk about Wilt, they refer to his strength as almost some godlike ability. For instance, Johnny Kerr, the former coach of the Bulls during Wilt's final years in the league, has been quoted as saying, "People talk about the strength of Shaq. I think Wilt could have picked up Shaq and thrown him through the hoop." Yes, in a time before modern weightlifting routines had become popular, Wilt has been described by many as the strongest basketball player they had ever seen. He used this strength to casually body defenders on his way to the basket, to throw away his opponents when they challenged him for rebounds, to intimidate everyone the moment he stepped on the court. This strength is one of the biggest reasons why Wilt supporters claim he would still be a star in the NBA today. And while I'm not going to take a side in that argument because it's impossible to prove one way or the other, the fact remains that Wilt's strength was freakish, and it's scared people. Former Celtic Casey Jones remembers that once Wilt used one arm to stop Casey and lift him off the ground with his feet dangling. Casey remembers that his legs were still shaking when he went to attempt his free throws. And as for his teammates, there was a time when Paul Silas was about to get in a fight, and instead, Wilt picked him up, turned him around, and said, "We're not going to have that stuff." To which Paul responded, "Yes, sir. And trust me, there are other stories. Stories of Wilt picking up two 200-pound grown men up into the air by their shirts like some cartoon. Stories of a 40-year-old Wilt casually lifting 600 pounds as if it was nothing. But at this point, I think you get it. Wilt was just on another level. Which brings us to number 3. Faster than NFL running backs. I guess now would be a good time to mention the fact that Wilt was nearly a world-class track athlete. In college, he won the Big 8 high jump competition 3 years in a row. He threw a shot put 56 feet and he ran a sub 11 second 100-yard dash. It's that last fact, Wilt's speed, that is perhaps the most impressive thing here. Because throughout history, there have been a handful of guys who were really tall, really strong, and could jump really high. But how many of those guys were also among the fastest men on the planet? Time and time again in the NBA, Wilt proved his speed, as several times a game he would beat other centers down the court for easy baskets. His teammates knew to look out for these opportunities as much as possible because they knew how fast Wilt really was. His former coach with the Warriors, Alex Hannum, illustrated this by saying, "When I coached the San Francisco Warriors, I thought Al Attles was the fastest guy on our team by far. So I set up a series of races, baseline to baseline. In the finals, it was Wilt and Al Attles, and Wilt just blew past him. I'm convinced that Wilt Chamberlain is one of the greatest all-around athletes the world has ever seen. And if you're still not convinced of how fast Wilt really was, just listen to this. Legend has it that at a party, Wilt and NFL Hall of Fame running back Jim Brown began to argue about who was faster. So they went outside and Wilt beat him in a race. Then Jim Brown wanted a second chance. So they raced again and again. Wilt beat one of the best running backs the NFL has ever seen in a test of speed. Yeah, the man was just ridiculous. Number 2. Underrated defensive beast. Okay, so I mentioned before that I'm not going to talk about Wilt's stats in this video. And I'm not. We all know his stats. So instead, let's talk about the most underrated part of Wilt's game, his shot blocking ability. Because when we look back at that era, everyone remembers Bill Russell and his defensive ability. What everyone has forgotten, though, was that Wilt had plenty of defensive talent of his own. Now, the NBA did not record blocks and steals back when Wilt played, so we don't know exactly how many blocks a game he had. What we do know is that there are several stories available that can give us an insight onto just how dominant he was. For instance, before his first game against Wilt, future Hall of Famer Walt Bellamy went up to Wilt and said, "Hello, Mr. Chamberlain, I'm Walter Bellamy." Wilt shook his hand and replied, "Hello, Walter. You won't get a shot off in the first half." He then proceeded to block all 9 of Bellamy's shot attempts in the first half, finally beginning the second half by saying, "Okay, Walter, now you can play." Keep in mind, Walter Bellamy averaged 31 points a game that year. It's stories like that one that prove just how good Wilt was defensively when he locked in. He was so good that sometimes players wanted to fight him. For instance, there was a time when opposing big man Tom Masheri tried to fake Wilt out with 4 pump fakes before finally putting up a shot and was rejected. The ball landed back in Masheri's hands, where again, he tried several fakes and again, he put up a shot and was rejected. Instead of trying a third shot, Masheri decided to fight Wilt in anger. So he tried to throw a few punches, but Wilt just looked at him and laughed while holding his hand on Masheri's forehead. Finally, Wilt said, "That's enough," and Masheri stopped immediately. And the final story we have of Wilt's defensive dominance comes from Larry Brown, as Brown witnessed a time when Magic Johnson had just entered the league and Wilt was in his mid-40s. The two were playing a pickup game at UCLA, and in the game, Magic made a a few questionable calls. This made Wilt mad, so Wilt declared to everyone, there will be no more layups in this gym. He then proceeded to block every single one of Magic's shots, because unlike a lot of star athletes, Wilt did not get soft with age. In fact, and number one volleyball star, to give you an idea of just how well Wilt Chamberlain aged, when the man was 45, the Cavaliers offered him a contract. Then, when he was 50, the New Jersey Nets did the same thing. That's how in shape Wilt kept himself. Maybe he lost a step when he entered his 40s, but he made up for it by somehow managing to increase his strength. This happened when he was working out with Arnold Schwarzenegger on the set of their movie Conan the Destroyer. As on set, Wilt increased his bench press to an absurd 500 pounds. He managed to maintain this late into his life, as when he was 59, he was still able to bench press 465 pounds, which was incredible. But moving away from his strength, let's talk about Wilt's volleyball career. Yes, did you know that after the NBA, Wilt began a career as a volleyball player? Somehow in his retirement, Wilt was able to learn a completely different sport and become a near professional level player in that sport. For years after basketball, Wilt appeared in volleyball all-star games against some of the best competition in the world. And while his fundamentals were a little spotty, I mean, he did start playing volleyball seriously when he was in his 40s, Wilt was still able to use his overall athleticism to gain one of the deadliest spikes the sport had seen. And due to his playing ability as well as his work trying to raise volleyball awareness across the United States, Wilt was inducted into the Volleyball Hall of Fame. Was there anything on earth this guy could not do? So there you have it, guys. 5 or about 20 stories why Wilt Chamberlain was not human. I hope you enjoyed this video, and the craziest part is I left out so many stories, because if I included every story I saw, this video would have been about 45 minutes long, and I'm not sure a lot of people would have sat through a 45-minute YouTube video. I think this was long enough though, and I hope you learned something new. And yes, if you did enjoy this video, make sure to subscribe. Again, 30,000 subscribers away from 1 million. Together, we got this. And if you're already a subscriber, you know the deal at this point. You're awesome. We both know this. In fact, I think the whole world knows it. And as always, have an awesome day, and cue the music.